Another key area of MS1 is audiences. Christine, what main areas would you consider that teachers cover when they're looking at audiences?
Well, I think students need to be first of all aware of the whole concept which underlies our specification in terms of audience, is that different audiences respond to the same text differently, and to consider the reasons for that different response, which could be to do with gender or age or experience or situation. Then we would expect them to understand target audience, but to be able to back that up with some sort of evidence. Students are very keen to tell you that a target audience is 17 to 70, but without really telling us why that is. And audiences don't just have to be categorised in terms of age, so looking at other ways in which audiences are categorised, which might be very specific to a particular media form. So for example, a good example is advertising, where you can look at a young and Rubicam and you can look at that particular way of categorising audiences, but to be very clear that that's not transferable. You couldn't then transfer young and Rubicam to a study of film. It's very specifically designed to allow us to consider audiences in terms of advertising. And also the whole idea of audience positioning through the text. So for example, through language, through technical codes, the content, the context, and how therefore an audience might respond to that positioning.
And what kinds of audience theories would you consider to be relevant for teaching at MS1?
Well, obviously it's really important that the theories are appropriate and that they are applied with knowledge and understanding to the examples that students have chosen. So we would look at theories like uses and gratifications, so we would look at what audiences get from texts and why audiences might choose to consume particular texts for particular reasons. And that might be linked to notions of escapism, what gives audience pleasures. And then we would look at the sort of theory that is related to the whole notion of audience positioning, which is Stuart Hall's theory to do with responses to that positioning, so the way in which texts are encoded and decoded, and that relates to a negotiated, a preferred or an oppositional reading to a particular text. There are some newer theories. David Gauntlet's pick and mix theory is useful in that he talks about the notion that audiences are discerning in how they use texts. If they read Cosmopolitan, they're not going to read every single bit of it. They're going to pick the bits that are most appropriate to them and reject the bits that they don't want to read. And also, obviously, two-step flow and opinion leaders can also at times be an appropriate theory to use.
I mean, obviously we want to avoid the sort of classic response where students simply describe a theory to us. So could you give us an example of how to apply a theory relevantly?
Well, it's quite interesting to look at the whole notion of audience positioning and to look at Hall's theories that to do, as I said, with preferred, negotiated and oppositional readings. And a really interesting text that I've been watching recently is Jamie's Dream School, because it is so clever in terms of how we are positioned as audiences, and the positioning happens through the camera, through the voiceover, through the selection of the shots that we're given to allow us or to encourage us to empathise with a particular character or to reject a particular character or feel that, the good example is the David Starkey history lecturer, who in the first episode is constructed to appear to be not a very nice person at all, and the camera shows us that. And in the second episode, we've got a different representation, a different construction, therefore our response to that is a bit more negotiated. So we sort of think, well, okay, he's making a bit of an effort, this is a little bit different. And a lot of it is through the editing and the reaction shots and how we are meant to feel as if we're looking in on something that we shouldn't have access to, so we become in privileged spectator position. So a really interesting text, I think, to look at in terms of positioning and in terms of an audience's response, therefore, to that positioning.